We are so sorry.
I was speaking still, but I didn't realize you were not listening to me.
Yes,
I'm so sorry about that.
So,
I don't know how I can make up for that.
Is it okay if you can begin again? We haven't. We were just talking with the past speakers and waiting. But is that okay with you? If you
certainly no, I can start again. I probably will do it in a more summary way, not to keep you for too long. For me, it's the beginning of the day. It's not late. No, I'm so sorry about that. I didn't realize it. I couldn't. I had my presentation on the screen. So let me. Normally this works like that. I've been teaching like that for a whole year. Let me get back to this presentation. Are you getting it now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, so that was my last slide. I have to go back to
Let's go back
to the beginning.
Just as I guessed, Dr. Noel.
Right. So I now, can you listen to me now and see my slide presentation?
Yes, sir. It's all yours.
I'll do it, but possibly not in as long a version as I did now. I just started by presenting my own very modest participation in this work at the beginning when I visited the Philippines in the 80s, where I was at the invitation of the National Museum of Dr. Evangelista and Jesper Alter. I visited the site, and this, after I had published a few texts, Chinese texts of the early first millennium and texts of the 16th century written by the Portuguese describing the large ships that traded in Southeast Asian waters when they arrived there in 1509, 1511, when they took Malacca. And my surprise to see that no historian had ever taken that into account, that the Southeast Asians were considered to be small peddling traders that didn't build any large trading ships, and therefore, in fact, could not have participated into the main economic scene of the history of the region. So after witnessing the discoveries of the Bhutan boats that were pioneered the start of Southeast Asian nautical archaeology, that's how, together with my Indonesian colleagues, I was working for almost 20 years in Jakarta, from Jakarta with the archaeological service there. We decided to try as much as possible to document other sites in Southeast Asia that would bring additional proof of the involvement of Southeast Asian in shipbuilding technologies, that in developing their own very efficient shipbuilding technologies and building large ships that would have be very much part of the economic scene of South China Sea, Indian Ocean during the first and second millennium, at least until the arrival of the big companies of Europe, the Dutch East Indies and British in the 17th century. The Portuguese 16th century is a bit in between, where the local ships were still playing a very important role. So that was basically what we tried to do. Is you can sum up by saying to integrate the Bhutan discoveries that opened up this nautical archaeology scene in Southeast Asia, and integrate this data into a broader regional and even Asian scene altogether. I pass quickly. I quoted, of course, the work by Dr. Laxinia, and saying that she knows far more than I can ever say on these Bhutan boats. And her dissertation also integrates the other finds in Southeast Asia. I did quote two that I often use when I talk about ships, two interesting quotation by well-known maritime historians and archaeologists. just so that people who are not familiar with shipping and sails and shipbuilding, that they should realize that the ships, and particularly the large ships, are the most complex artifact that was produced prior to Industrial Revolution, and that the people, the societies that built those ships, needed very sophisticated knowledge to build them, to finance the building, to build them, to sail them, to trade with them. So studying the ship, as the other quotation that I often use say, studying the ships is a way of studying the trade and the society that carried out the trade. That was by Frederick Lane, who was a very well-known American historian who worked on Venice in the Renaissance time. And so studying ships and shipwrecks is not just for technological fun and to discover evolution of technologies, is very much to study the overall societies that built those ships. I had a brief passage to show also, before going into boat building, that some of the local lore about barangay and about barangay being both the name of a boat and the name of a social unit, a barrio in the Philippines, is something that is knowledge that is spread all over Southeast Asia, and I contributed based on my what I acquired during my trip in the Philippines, very much on that. I wrote that in the 80s, that article called Ship-Shaped Societies, that built up on this metaphor of the ship being a metaphor for the social unit. But also, as I did that, I came across these dampuan of Philippine lore that were popularized by the saga of Otley Bayer, and apparently still popular among the Cham of Vietnam, Muslim Chams of Vietnam, folklore and local laws that linked Champa, which is now Vietnam, with the Philippines and with the introduction of Islam, which historically might not be completely correct, but I was interested in the name of Dampuan because it reminded me of, in the Philippines, it's a people, a whole group of people, but in Java, it is very much one specific character. He is Dampuan, or Dangpu Hawang, is in fact a shipmaster, captain of a ship, but he's the captain, the skipper, but he's also the owner, and he's also the person who trades. And he left a lot of memories, particularly on the northern coast of Java. You have stories of puppet shows that tell about these stories of Dampuawang, the shipmaster that in some of the stories comes from Banjarmasin. It became so popular, particularly among the Chinese communities in northern Java, because they associated this Javanese lore on Dampuahawang with the most famous shipmaster they ever came across, and that played a big role in creating these Chinese communities in central Java, which was the Admiral Cheng He, who, as you know, brought all these large fleets 7 times in the early 15th century across Southeast Asian seas, and particularly in Java, where his memory survived under the name of Dampuawang or Sampokong, Samputwalang, even in shrines in the northern coast of Java, where you have bits and pieces, anchors and timbers of ships said to be remains from his passage there. And you have little booklets like that one I showed on the picture there. Primbon is just an almanac. It's the kind of booklet that people consult to see, to look at, to know if this is a favorable day to marry, to do this or that in their everyday life, basically in the Chinese, Sino-Javanese communities. But with the name Dampuawang on its title, just to show you how popular it is also elsewhere in Southeast Asia. And then I showed you how this this name, this character, legendary name, Puhawang or Dam Puhawang, in fact, stems from solid historical data. We have in one of the inscriptions that date back from the foundation of Srivijaya. Didn't go into the details of the whole inscription, but you have two characters that appear as essential to the economy of the kingdom, which is a maritime kingdom, a thalassocracy, and these two names are Puhawang, again, Dam Puhawang, the shipmasters, and they're usually paired with the sea merchants, those that traveled aboard these large ships, trading ships, to carry out the trade that is absolutely essential to the life of these coastal polities and kingdoms. Also, I showed this seal, golden ring seal, that carries the name of the owner, of course, and then that was recovered from a shipwreck called the Intan shipwreck, excavated in the Java Sea, which is most probably also a Southeast Asian large ship carrying a cargo of ceramics, dated to the 10th century. And the name engraved on this seal ring is Dang Puhawang, the shipmaster, whose personal name is Kuta. So you see, they're not only legends, these people play a role. They are recorded in many other inscriptions in Central Java, in Sumatra, in Bali. So they have a historical existence. They are the shipmasters. They are the sinews of all these trade networks. They are essential. I can now go quickly, just gave a bit of context for these Bhutan finds, since 8th to 10th century is a period of economic boom in the whole of Southeast Asia and Asian sea routes altogether. It's a time when maritime exchange particularly boomed, and it was a period of growth. So the Bhutan finds are very much part of this period. This is when the Laguna inscription was written down in 900. It is an old Malay. That means also that the Malay was becoming a lingua franca at that time, which is another proof of the involvement of Filipinos into these wider networks. Malay being the language of Srivijaya, the powerful kingdom of that time. Briefly, I showed these, they're very well known to you, and just to give you some context and proof of a partly Indianization of some of the Philippines, or at least Indic inputs into Philippine culture of the time. Again, this is just an indication of how active all these trade networks were in passing over cultural traits to different societies. This is also when Bhutan kings sent ambassadors to the court of the Song in China, which is another proof of the involvement of it, which provided context. Then I went on to tell you about the shipbuilding, more technological part of my paper, with first this slide showing how the Bhutan boats and other boats of Southeast Asia could be placed into a general evolution of shipbuilding. Outriggers and wing bows, as we will see on a few slides that were found on the Bhutan boats, are very much specific technology that were spread all over the ancient world from the Pacific, since the Austronesian-speaking people, the whole of the Pacific, as you know well, they came from Taiwan, at least and came across the Philippines and then expanded into the rest of Southeast Asia and into the east, into the Pacific, to the west, into Madagascar. But you can accompany this by diffusion of shipbuilding technology. And one very characteristic one is what the archaeologists that work on shipbuilding tend to call winged bows. I'll show you some slides to explain that. these have been, and the lash lug construction that is associated with the Bhutan boats too. I will give a few details on that immediately after that. And again, this places the Bhutan boats into a much broader scene during which these technologies evolved and accompanied movements of population, of trade, of commercial exchange. These are the wing bows on the right-hand side. You can see examples given by Horridge then on various boats of Southeast Asia. And the central, I'm not talking about outriggers. It's a very tricky questions about outriggers or no outriggers. Some people say the Bhutan boats had outriggers, but as you were shown in the documentary that we saw before, you could very well sail these boats without outriggers. So it's a moot question, let's say. The wing bows that you find very in a concrete way on Bhutan boats have this kind of technology to build the fore part of a boat, which is a difficult part to build, spread all the way to African canoes, East African canoes on the coast of the Indian Ocean, which is probably a legacy of the Austronesian people when they went further down than to people, Madagascar, as you know. This was found in a more sophisticated way in a shipwreck that I'll tell you about a bit more later, found in central Java, which Indonesian archaeologists excavated a few years back, just in 2009 and 10, where you have these wing bows here. Examples from the Bhutan wreck. This was spotted already by the team who studied the Bhutan 2 boats kept in the National Museum in the 90s. The team of Jeremy Green and his colleagues of the Western Australian Maritime Museum already had spotted this particular shipbuilding tradition of the wing bows. Others that we found in North Sumatra with my Indonesian colleagues, they all belong more or less to the same tradition. And this again helps us bring together and identify a specific tradition that is Southeast Asian. Other examples that I gave, they're not very good. Much of the work that we did in Indonesia at the beginning was from looted sites, destroyed sites. There were rescue operations, so some of the timbers are very much broken. But they did give us details on shipbuilding technologies. These boats have now been found that are akin to those of Bhutan, have now been found all over Southeast Asia, either in context, more often than not, in context comparable to Bhutan, that is, in wet land, in harborsides, riverbeds, etc. Some of them now, and these are sometimes a bit more important but more difficult to study because the timbers are very often deep down into the sea. Some of them are real shipwrecks. The others are boats that were probably abandoned after many years of work on the shore. This is what defines the lashed lug tradition that helps define what the Bhutan boats, the tradition the Bhutan boats belong to. The planks, you can still hear me. Is it all right?
Yes, sir. We hear you loud and clear.
Oh, good. So that I don't have to say it a third time. The planks are joined together by dowels, but in Bhutan, the frames of the boat, the skeleton of the boat, is lashed to these, what we call lugs, that are carved out of the planks when the boat is being built, designed, and then built. And these are made of cabo negro, which is ijok in Malay or Javanese. It's a fiber that is taken from Arenga pinnata, the sugar palm tree, which preserves beautifully in water, doesn't rot at all in wet conditions, and has survived extraordinarily well in archaeological contexts. But this is already one second stage in the evolution of this technology. Before the Bhutan type of assembly is found. We have since then found phase one assemblages that have the same frames attached to lugs, but the planks themselves are not attached by dowels. They are also lashed together. And this is the first phase in the evolution of this specific Southeast Asian technology. And they are lashed together, the planks, in a way which is radically different from what the Arabo-Indian world has, the technology that were called soon boats that was developed in the western part of the Indian Ocean. They are completely apart. They both are soon boats, if you wish, but they are built in radically different ways. Phase two is the one that the Bhutan boats belong to, when the lashings between the planks are replaced by dowels. You can illustrate that by bringing in other wrecks or remains of boats. Sometimes they're just planks that were recovered. The very early ones of the early first millennium, some of them with no dowels at all, only lashings to keep the planks together, and the lugs to which the frames are attached, of course, here. This is in southern Peninsula Thailand. This is on Peninsula Malaysia, Pontian, the one lash. These lashings here keep being used until the 7th or 8th century, when dowels that are very few in the early sites, like here, start being a bit more numerous as time passes, but still with lashings, as in Sambirejo, which is South Sumatra, or Punjuharjo, which is Central Java. And in the Bhutan boats, they have disappeared and replaced completely by dowels. So this is stage two. Stage three will have the lashings of the frames to the lugs disappear and the lugs themselves disappear. But this comes later in 16th or 17th century. They have survived in eastern Indonesia. Some of the technologies have survived, like these whaling boats of Solor of La Malera, as was noted for long by others. And it's a very sturdy construction, because these small boats have to be very strong to be able to be towed by whales when they are harpooned. And obviously they serve their purpose. They have survived. I discovered this when I did some research work in the Maldives in the middle of the Indian Ocean, when I realized that the Maldivian boats, the donis, still had these lugs surviving, which is absolutely not compatible with the Western Indian Ocean soon plank technology. This is very much a survival of Southeast Asian lashed lug technology, even though these boats were riveted, they were no longer lashed. But these lugs survived in some of the older donis, as you can see them there. And this is one proof that the Austronesian-speaking people from Borneo or Sumatra stopped over in the Maldives and transmitted these technologies on their way to East Africa and Madagascar, where they migrated to people the island. Chinese texts do tell you about foreigners using cabo negro or ijo to bind timbers together in boats, and this is a 4th century flora, so you see that this is 5 centuries before the Bhutan boats. Contemporary or a bit earlier in the Bhutan boats, you have these texts that started me on this quest for a Southeast Asian large boat of the Chinese that describe ships carrying those Buddhist monks from China to India through Southeast Asia, through Sumatra, Srivijaya, to collect Chinese canonical texts of Buddhism and translated them into Chinese to develop Buddhism in China. And these monks, they're keen observers, they describe with quite a few details and dimensions ships that are up to 50 meters in length or 60 for the other one, carrying hundreds of people aboard with large, considerable tonnages with many masts and sails. So you see, for many years before we found these ships in archaeological context, we had reaction, other historians telling us these monks exaggerated. It is impossible. Southeast Asian could not build such large ships. And this was very much a byproduct of colonial history. In fact, nautical archaeology has now proved, starting with the discoveries of the Bhutan boats and elaborating on all this and with all the new finds, have now proved that these boats were really built in Southeast Asia. I passed rapidly through a few shipwrecks that we discovered in Indonesia to show the links with the Bhutan boats. This is the one excavated by Evans. He was the pioneer, but didn't know he was doing nautical archaeology, as the discipline did not exist in 1927. But he did relatively well reported on excavation of these remains on the east coast of Malaysia, a boat that probably traded with the Mekong Delta in the kingdom of Funan, because it carried ceramics from Funan. That was dated to the 3rd or 4th century, which makes it one of the earliest recorded lash lug sea. You can see the lugs, the keel plank and the lugs to which the frames that have not survived, this is not a frame, would have been attached. In Indonesia and Sumatra, with my colleagues, Indonesian colleagues, as we excavated Sriwijaya sites, trying to document the birth of Sriwijaya in Palembang, South Sumatra, we came across a legend of a pond that would have contained a ship. We did manage to find time, funds, and large pumps to empty this pond, which is a bit inland, which was a bit odd for large ships to sail, but geology proved that it was linked to the main river. And to our surprise, the planks of the ship, there were ship planks obviously, were standing upright and not lengthwise, horizontally like they should on a boat. A bit of inquiry taught us, this is an anecdote, nothing to do with shipping technology, that the Japanese occupation army during the war was probably bored in this place, a remote place, and having heard that there was a treasure or something to be gotten from this pond, brought their own, probably industrial means to dig this pond, extract all these planks, which they carved out to make them thinner and pointed, to drive them into the ground to protect probably the excavation at the center from collapsing walls, which we had quite a lot of difficulties digging out again, because this is very sticky mud, and we even found some rickshaws in it. It had become a kind of dustbin, this pond. Anyway, we discovered the planks, we draw the planks, and obviously there were ship planks of the Lashlab tradition and dated to the 5th to 7th century, which is even before Sriwijaya. Other finds around Palembang, again, recovery operations, because they were brought to light by local people, but we could manage to record them. They were tropical timbers, some of them at least, ironwood like this one, preserved well, even though they're not treated, not all to do. So we did as much recording as we could, until finally one well-preserved shipwreck or ship remains, because it was probably an abandoned ship on the shore after many years of use, was discovered by local villagers in central Java at Punjuharjo. This part was excavated by the local people, which means that it's not as well kept as the aft part here, but thank the Indonesian Archaeological Service and its branch at Jogja intervened, and looting was stopped and excavation was carried out, and they were kind enough to invite me to join the excavation in 2009 and 10, and we were lucky to discover a particularly well-preserved boat. It was still in shape to an extent, even though the top parts, of course, had disappeared, but the lashings and the stitching and even the stringers, these longitudinal timbers, were kept with stanchions here to keep another kind of bridge further up, things that are not kept in other shipwrecks. This is just a plan of what we found in the excavation and a 3D modeling of what we found. So you see the shape of the boat is still there, and details of the lashings that were beautifully preserved. This is the lashings between the planks. This is a 7th, 8th century boat belonging to phase 1, pre-Bhutan, let's say. It was built in a technology where the planks were still assembled by lashings, and this is just an attempt at understanding how the lashings were made. The lashings, like the Bhutan boats, were there to attach the frames and the stringers here, you can see, to the lugs. Because they were well kept, we could start documenting the way these lashings were made. It's still an ongoing work. This is a provisional drawing, trying to understand how it worked and how they kept this tight to keep the boat from taking in water, to make the boat watertight, which is the essential function of the hull of a boat, is to float. Other finds were made in Vietnam rather recently by fishermen who brought this to a collector in central Vietnam, in Quang Ngai. These photographs were kindly sent to me by Alex Chang, who is an archaeologist in Vietnam. You can see the lugs, the central piece, which is probably a keel piece, lugs here, and the Cabo Negro, the ejok fiber, still kept here, that would have been used to lash the planks together, and of course the lugs here to be lashed to the frames. They carried some ceramics, all of them from the late 8th to early 9th century, Guangdong ware like these, with very interesting marks. They are being studied. I think they've been partly published already in Arabic, some of them, and others in Chinese, and Changsha ware, which also allows us to date these remains from late 8th to early 9th century. Finally, and this is what proved that the hypothesis of large Southeast Asian ships did really exist. The Intan and Java Sea wrecks had very few timbers, and Michael Flecker, who excavated them, thought they were Southeast Asian, but because the timbers were not well preserved, he couldn't completely prove it. Now, this Cirebon wreck, which, like the Intan and Java Sea wreck, carried hundreds of thousands of Chinese ceramics of the 10th century, even though it was buried deep in 50 meters of water, they, thanks to some of the divers, professional divers, to go to that depth, and to the recording of all the finds by Horst Liebner, who was on board of the excavation ship on the surface, who did a PhD on this shipwreck in 2014, the reference of which you have there. This ship happens to be carrying a large, heavy cargo of ceramics. It's not complete, aft and the bows and are not complete, but probably up to 40 meters in length. That means one of these very large ships described by those Chinese monks traveling on board these ships. And it traded obviously from China to Java. It is a lashed lug construction boat. You can see the lugs here with the hose that were used for lashing the timbers. And Horst Liebner, based on the data he could gather and on rather sophisticated calculations, did manage to rebuild some hypothetical representation of this Cirebon shipwreck. It is hypothetical. It makes much sense. It is based on solid data. There is a lot of speculation in it, but it is the closest we can come to a representation of a large Southeast Asian trading ship, of a round ship meant for cargo of the end of the first millennium or the early second millennium. And I concluded basically with this table. It's a bit technical, showing the evolution from in prehistorical times, simple dugouts with raised planks. Then, for the period that interests most, the plank-built boats where the dugout base becomes a keel, where you have first lashed frames to lugs and planks and stitched planks or lashed planks, then evolving into lashed frames and double plank, like the Bhutan boats. This seems to have survived in the Philippines and in eastern Indonesia into the 15th and 17th century. I haven't seen reports, but I got that from Dr. Laxina's dissertation. Those two shipwrecks that were found in the Philippines that are about this period and seem to have still been built according to the same technology, and certainly as this technology, which is also described by both Portuguese 16th century and Spanish, the famous Alcina manuscript, beautifully described in by Alcina in the 17th century. In Western Indonesia at least, but we don't have archaeological proof, we only have very detailed textual proof of the evolution of these into ships that are large as the Cirebon wreck, according to the Portuguese sources that used them for their own trade and trading ventures to China, to the Moluccas. These jong, the word Malay Javanese jong that appears in the 11th century, and which is not of Chinese origin, but of Austronesian origin. And these boats have completely given up lashings. Everything is doweled, including the frames to the planks and the planks together. This evolved some survivals that I showed for lashed lug, but basically it evolved into what could still be observed in detail in the 70s when I first started working in Indonesia. A very lively Indonesian shipbuilding scene still used this purely doweled technology that evolved from the early boats. And the best known, of course, are the Bugis Pinisi. Now you can no longer observe them because they've been motorized and they are now riveted, and they are in fact modern ships, even though they might still carry sails for tax purposes. And I concluded basically showing these beautiful representations, the only ones we have, of a late first millennium sailing boat, clearly Indonesians. You can see it from the sails. They are purely Southeast Asian sails with outriggers. So that's an argument in favor of outriggers. These are the boats, of course, depicted on the Borobudur reliefs. Here they are drawn by my very much regretted architect colleague from my institution, Jacques Dumarcet, who left us a few months ago. You know them better in this form, in photographs of these beautiful reliefs. There are 4 or 5 of them with 1 or 2 masts. And the last slide, they were made into a replica in the early 2000, sailed all the way to Africa and to Ghana, if needed, proving that these shipbuilding technology could very well be used to sail in open seas all the way to East Africa, the Indian Ocean, and even, which the Austronesian people never did, past the Cape of Good Hope and sail into the west coast of Africa. This replica is now on the Borobudur Museum. It was shipped back on a large cargo to Indonesia and is now exhibited near the Borobudur. And that was basically my conclusion. Thank you for listening to me again in a rather shorter form.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Pierre-Yves Manga. That was such a deep dive into shipbuilding traditions of Southeast Asia, coming from an expert in the field. We thank you very much for sharing to us your knowledge about this topic. Now we would like to open the floor or open the microphone for more questions on the topic.
Microphone is open, yes.
So, let's...
I'm ready to answer questions if I can.
There's one from Francis Garcia. He said, Sir Pierre, regarding the... No, it's not Pierre, it's Pierre-Yves.
Yeah.
Regarding the winged bows, are they more prominent with ancient large boats or smaller boats? Is it for ornamental purposes or do they have a certain function?
The most difficult part when you assemble a boat with planks is to close it off at bows or at the back of the boat also, and they're very often symmetrical, often four. And the most difficult part is to close it off so that water doesn't come in and the structure of the boat is made strong. There are many possible solutions to that problem that have been found in various areas in the world and even within Southeast Asia. Not all boats are built with wing bars. But this particular technology seems to have developed very much in association with this kind of lash lug technology, which is witnessed in the Bhutan boats first, but then in many other boats, and as I said, all the way to Africa. It's not decoration, it is the need to close off and to build something solid at the forepart boat to go into the seas, to make it watertight, and to keep all the planking together without planking being dismantled. So I think it's more a technological solution. Mm-hmm. That decoration was added to it is quite possible. But first of all, it's a technical problem that is solved this way.
Thank you very much, sir. But does it also affect the sailing power of the boat with the winged bows?
No, it can be used, as you could see from some of these pictures, it can be used to build a rather sharp, swift boat that has a pointed stem or stern also in some cases. No, it doesn't affect it. It's one solution. There are others, again, there are other solutions. And this technology evolved in Indonesia in Javanese boats, fishing boats and other, into something a bit different with a stem post or stern post. But it has survived in some vessels.
So apparently from your short lecture, there is this relationship between the development of cultures and the development of shipbuilding, because as the shipbuilding develops, the people are able to go farther in the high seas, and that gave them more chances to meet other cultures. So can we say that ships also are carriers of civilization?
Oh yes, they are the vectors that allowed people to move around in this kind of environment. On land, it's different. But you can carry, don't forget, a ship can carry, particularly those large ships, can carry enormous amounts of cargo. Mm-hmm. And the Silk Road, the real Silk Road on camels, could never carry as much as a ship. So this kind of very powerful exchange patterns that take place in Southeast Asian, in the Asian War, Indian Ocean, South China Sea, can only be carried by these large boats. So they are absolutely essential to the economy. And since they carry people, they carry the cultures. And the diffusion of shipping technology are just witness to these exchange. But on the boats, the people carried religions, they carried literary cultures, they carried many other cultural traits, not only the technologies. They carried also plants, many of the African plants, and even the foal, the chicken, and all these things were brought in by people, and they didn't swim there. They were carried on the boats. I mean, a chicken cannot cross the Indian Ocean if it's not carried on the boat. And we know now, the linguists have proved that chicken come from Southeast Asia. So those boats are absolutely essential for the diffusion of so many aspects of these cultures.
Thank you very much. Sir, if you have more questions, please post them on our Q&A box or comment them for those who are watching us on Facebook Live, comment them on the comment section and the tech team will forward it to us. I have another question because I have read before that the people who built the balangay boats in these islands in the ancient Bhutan imitated in some ways a boat from Indonesia called Pirao Barangay. What can you say about it?
There is these myths and lores and carried out in folklore, but they were originally myth, which is a lot more powerful for more simple societies, about the barangay. There is no proof that those boats were actual barangay. Barangay were some type of boats, obviously. Whether those found in Butuan were barangay or another kind of boat, nobody can prove it. There's no label there saying this is called a barangay. That it was associated with the barangay is typical of the richness of this maritime heritage of the Philippines, but there's no, real historical proof that it was called that name.
Because according to that article that I've read, it was the boats used by the Indonesians to go into our islands here in the Philippines when there was no Philippines yet, because those kind of narrow boats can easily navigate in among islands. Anyway, so there's another question. Are there distinctions among war boats, mercantile boats, among others, according to the usage as identified before? Please enlighten us.
Yes, definitely. Maritime historians and archaeologists usually, roughly define two broad categories of round boats and long boats. The Butuan boats seem to belong rather to the longboat type, which is a kind of swift boat that is usually not, it can be galleys. Mediterranean type galleys can become quite large too, but they can be propelled both by sails and by
rowers.
Oars. These can carry cargo, of course. They can carry men to fight. They can be used to when gunpowder and small cannon, Lantaka, the Philippines and others started being used in the 15th century or later. They carried guns also. They've been used by pirates. They've been used by traders to defend themselves. And these longboats are all over the place. And they certainly are very well suited because they have oars and they're not too heavy. They're very well suited for the inter-island trade. The large round boats are not there. Large, round, relatively slow boats. They're efficient to carry large cargoes of ceramics, like all those that were found in the bottom of the seas, carrying hundreds of thousands of bowls and other Chinese ceramics. And these are the round boats. These are the essential boats for large-scale overseas trading, the round ones. But the famous study on maritime historian Fernand Braudel, or just historian on the Mediterranean in the 40s and 50s, insisted on the fact that they are complementary. You need both for a thriving maritime economy.
May we invite also the other speakers to open your camera and join us in the discussion if you have questions to Mr. Pierre-Yves Manga. And I have two more questions here. Was abaca or Manila hemp used ever in the ancient boat lashing? Or was it exclusively Cabo Negro?
I never heard of abaca being used for boat building. I'm not quite sure about the properties of abaca when it comes to rotting in water and things like that. I never heard of it. The other material that is used and has been proved to be used, not in archaeological context, but in ethnographical context, is rattan. Rattan can be made into small fibers that can be used for lashing. In the Philippines, the cascos of the Bay of Manila the planks were attached with rattan. They were witnessed in Vietnam also. I never heard yet, but maybe some other archaeologists might complement my information. I never heard of any rotan being found in archaeological context yet, only ethnographical context. But not
Here is another follow-up question. Do these boats come together in groups or in single solo flight?
The war boats most probably traveled in fleets, because when you and the swift ones to protect themselves, sometimes to raid. We also heard of the Lanun and all these raids on the rest of Southeast Asia from the south of the Philippines. These obviously came in fleets. And fleets, when you need to carry many men to attack a neighboring city, come in fleets. The boats would have sailed very often alone, most probably.
Perhaps that is a question because the smallest political unit we have here is barangay, and that was taken from that tradition of people living together, families living together in one big barangay, the barangay, and that was the provenance of this political unit. Okay, there is a comment, not actually a question, from Carlito Amalia. He said, I am a puppet designer and puppeteer. I like the story of Wayang Dampu Awang, puppet play of the Pasisir. I have planned to create and to adopt King Killing story and Balangay puppetry someday. Younger and young at heart love puppet stories. The Balangay comes alive. Thank you for that encouraging reflection about this. Okay, here's another question. How does Butuan boat compare to the Viking longboats?
That's a good question. The only other shipbuilding tradition that has these lashed lugs is the Viking tradition. Mm-hmm. Some Viking tradition, at least the very early ones, they were excavated long ago. You know, the Danes and the Swedish developed very much the technology of nautical archaeology by excavating their Viking boats. These, some early diffusionist archaeologists called them, like Heine Gelden. This was very much trendy in the early 20th century, said that they must have been in contact and there was a from Vikings to Southeast Asia, which is totally absurd, of course. No Viking ever sailed. They sailed quite far in the Mediterranean, but not to Southeast Asia.
Not to Southeast Asia.
So it's, you know, there aren't that many ways of building a ship and a boat. And mankind invented sometimes on two sides of the planet the same technology to build a boat, because the choices are not that many.
Thank you very much. And may we ask the previous speakers if you have a question to Monsieur Manga? How about Dr. Noel, Dr. Canilao, Dr. Laksina? Even our speakers for tomorrow, you may have questions. Ms. Agni Mukhtar, Dr. Abrera, please feel free. Is there one? Okay, before we get into your question, here's another one. How do the Butuan boats compare to the boats used by Pacific Islanders?
I'm not very much of a specialist of Pacific Islands. I've read a few studies on them, and mostly ethnographic, because there's no, as far as I know, there's no finds from archaeology yet for Pacific boats. They clearly evolved from the same kind of technology. You have, particularly in the Marianas, in the closer islands, those that are closer to just east of the Philippines, there seem to be some technology that compare very closely. The wing boats, for instance, and the way some lashings are used also. I think we need more archaeological work, because ethnographical observations, and some of them already by secondary testimonies and accounts, are not enough. In Southeast Asia, we're lucky now to have both ethnographical data, written textual data, and now archaeological data that really brought all this together. This is not the case in the Pacific, but they are of the same family. The language spoken by the sailors were Austronesian, and the technology clearly evolved, but evolved separately from.
Our other guests, do you have questions? Okay, I still have some questions here. Is there any evidence of possible large sea creatures as the basis of various mythical sea creatures of Philippine folklore encountered by our ancestors, carved remains in the Balangay or other ancient Southeast Asian boats? So is there a reminiscence of these large sea creatures in the carvings on the boats?
Well, the boats themselves are not built like a fish because they would go underwater. Submarines are, but we're not talking about submarines here. Those large creatures are very important in various beliefs of local people living on the coast. In Vietnam, for instance, the Chams, who are Austronesian-speaking people, have a very important cult to whales. And there are temples devoted to cult of the whales. If you look at the reliefs of the Borobudur, you have plenty of sea creature or of Indian temples. But this is all the dangers of the sea. I've been teaching in Paris now with some colleagues about the danger at sea, teaching maritime history, and we spent a whole year talking about the danger at sea. And the sea monsters are very often representing those dangers that it is risky to sail on open seas and sometimes also in smaller closed-off seas. You've got storms, you've got big fishes that might attack you. They're not known to attack ships really, but they do represent the fear of all the sailors, you know. It is dangerous to sail. Many ships sink. Archaeologists make a profit from it, but for those who were on board, it was a tragedy. And you know, I forgot which Greek author said that you have the world is divided in three. You have the dead, you have the living, and you have the seamen. Up somewhere in between.
Thank you so much for that, sir. And here's another one from Francis Garcia again. And by the way, thank you for the questions earlier sent by our participants. What is the best way to preserve the wood of Butuan boats, sailing replicas for outdoor or indoor displays?
Again, I'm really not a specialist of these technologies. They've been developing over the years. Many have been tried. The PEG technology, polyethylene glycol, seems to be the easiest way of doing things, replacing basically the water into the wooden cells by plastic. It's hard technology to apply. They've been trying freezing. They've tried a lot of things. Again, I'm not really the person to answer that. All I can see from my readings and listening to colleagues in France and maritime archaeology in the Mediterranean is very well developed. Quite old ships have been found, and they seem to favor PEG technology, even though it's quite expensive and tiresome to implement. But again, you would need advice from specialists, not from me.
Dr. Canilao has a question. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you, Ma'am Rochelle. Greetings, Monsieur. Just a question because you showed a map a while ago. The maritime trade route branches into two.
No, you unmute yourself.
I can't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry. You had a map a while ago with the trade route branching into two directions at Lubang Island. Dr. Rodriguez, you're familiar with she published an article about the Salcedo trip of Salcedo in that area. So it's a pretty interesting island because of the garrisons in the area. So do you think these are common garrisons are also part of the seascape during this time? Thank you.
There probably were. I'm not quite sure the garrison would be a proper term because all these functions of society were not so well defined as in modern times. The sea routes I always put on my maps. This is a hobby of maritime historians to put sea route. What I drew on the map is based on texts of the 16th and 17th century, both Portuguese, Spanish texts describing precisely these routes, and Chinese texts. Now we have a group working on the Chinese texts of the 17th century, comparing these. So when I put them on the map, it is based on actual 16th, 17th century sources. But shipping technology haven't changed between the early times and until longitudes were discovered. I mean, the way of calculating longitudes was discovered in the late 18th. So if you were in 16th century, basically they were sailing like they did before, along the same routes. Garrisons, I can't really say. I can't think of any historical source talking about garrison. In Malay, in Sumatra, which is really my field, my own field in the Malay world, properly Malay-speaking world, at least in the 16th, 17th century, you don't have garrisons. You know, the fleets, when they attack each other, Aceh attacking Malacca, Johor, etc., the fleets are gathered for a certain purpose when they want to attack. But even a powerful sultan like Iskandar Muda in Aceh in the 17th century has to wait for the rice to be brought in and before the people are available. So the people are his clientele. They are all the local farmers, the local people. Everyone brings in his own people to man a fleet that goes to war. They're not garrisons, and they won't go if they haven't finished harvesting their rice. So they have to wait for the right season. Even a very powerful sultan like Iskandar Muda has to wait for the right season to attack. So I don't think garrison would be a good term to describe these times.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Canilo. And Dr. Agni Mukhtar has a question. Go ahead.
Hello. Yes, thank you. Hello, Professor Mangan. I haven't been fortunate to have the opportunity to meet you in person, but your works were and still are the ones that inspired me to study the Leslat boats and ships, especially in Indonesia. I saw in one of your presentation, you showed a 3D model of the Punjuharjo boat. My question is, was that from the condition of the boat during the excavations? Because at the moment my colleagues and I were working on kind of like reconstruction of the Punjuharjo boat, but using the current conditions. So we did a 3D photogrammetry of the reconstructed boat, and a few things apparently didn't match with the original report and everything. So that would be great if you want to share where we could find the 3D photogrammetry of the condition of the boat during the excavation. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, we haven't met yet. I read your masters and all this, but we haven't met. As you know well, I've been trying to come to Indonesia for the past 3 years and haven't been able to do it because you can't cross borders and you can't sail to Indonesia or fly to Indonesia now. The first thing I'll do as soon as I'm authorized to come into Indonesia and come and see you all in Jogja and whatever it is, and share all this. The 3D modeling is really done by, at some point I had some funds left to spend, and there was a group of people who work with French underwater archaeologists who were ready to help. So I shared the data that we had gathered together with your colleagues, with Novita Abbas and the whole team when we were together in Punjuharjo, and I shared the data with these people, and they came up with this drawing. There are still some mistakes. But again, even within France, we were separated by COVID because this team is in south of France, I'm in Paris. So before I can share the whole thing and bring it to you, I would like to finalize it as soon. We can now travel, but there's a ban coming again. So all this is late because communication has been difficult in the past few years. But of course, it is there to be shared with Indonesian colleagues. I mean, we always work together and shared information, and there's not going to stop now. We are stopped by the COVID.
Yeah, true. Thanks, Professor Mangel. Look forward for our next discussion.
Look forward to meeting you too.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mokhtar. And I want to read here two comments on your presentation. This one is from Lorenzo Hipolito. He said, it was very enlightening paper presentation. And one from Mr. Pilatan. Thank you so much, Dr. Pierre-Yves Manga, for a very comprehensive, interesting, and informative presentation. Are there other questions from our guests, our participants? Dr. Laksina, did you raise your hand earlier?
Oh, hi, yes, but not for a question. It was just to say hello and say what a pleasure it is to finally meet Dr. Mangan.
Even if it's on video only.
And virtually only, and I hope that we do have a chance to meet. Like Agni, your work was really pushed my research for Butuan. And I remember you being so gracious when I reached out to you by email, and it was a big help to completing my work. So that's all. I do hope we get to meet personally.
Yes, you hope to, very much so.
Thank you, Doctor. I hope, Mr. Manga, that you can come to Butuan, because for us who are Butuanans, who are from Butuan ourselves, it is such a pleasure and such an honor to be listening to these presentations about a boat whose provenance traces into our own Shenu, but we don't even know about it. And I'm so glad to have heard all these presentations about our own Butuan boat. So, are there other more questions? If there is none, we would like to give this certificate of appreciation to Mr. Pierre-Yves Manga for his presentation in the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference, Session 11, entitled Early Philippine and Southeast Asian Boat Building and Gold Crafting Technology, from December 6 to 10, 2021 via Zoom's webinar. This session is co-convened with Father Saturnine Urius University and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. The National Quincentennial Committee was created through Executive Order Number 55, Series of 2018, to prepare the country in commemorating the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan, the Philippine part in the First Circumnavigation of the world, and other related events. The Philippine International Quincentennial Conference is also in solidarity with the Year of Filipino Pre-Colonial Ancestors and the Philippine-Spanish Friendship Day. Given this 8th of December 2021, signed Dr. Rene Escalante, Executive Director, National Quincentennial Committee, Chairman, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Chief Convener, Philippine International Quincentennial Conference. And a soft copy of the certificate will be emailed to you soonest. Before we end the session, sir, do you have your final word to all of us?
Oh, my final words can only be, please do go on studying your boat building and seafaring scene. Philippines is a model for that. Indonesia for long has turned its back to the sea, where I worked, and together with an Indonesian colleague, Adri Lapian, now the seas, we struggled to get former governments of Indonesia to admit the fact that they were living on islands. But it took us a long time. The present government of Indonesia has completely switched its angle now and has accepted the fact that Indonesia, like Philippines, is an archipelagic state. So it is much more favorable for that kind of study in Indonesia. And please keep it up in the Philippines. And I would so much love to come back to Butuan. I enjoyed Butuan in the 80s. Always thought I would be back there, but, well, haven't yet.
You're welcome anytime, sir. And thank you really for rubbing into us this desire to know more about the story of our ancient boats. I know quite well that the French are very, very respectful of history, and I hope this will really push us to do more things about our own history as a people. And my takeaway for this session is, as boat building developed, the islanders also widened their reach overseas, which contributed to the enriching of the languages. The boats of old were not just containers of goods exchanged among peoples. It was a vessel that channeled the development of cultures and languages. In fact, the vessel bore the development of civilizations. These ships not only pictured the trades of ancient times, but these were glimpses into the way of life of the ancient people. I guess that is the reason why when we talk about boat building, it speaks so much to our depths, because that is tantamount to looking back to our own origins. For the Zoom attendees, the Zoom system has automatically logged your attendance for today. Please check your emails for panel evaluation form that will be sent within 24 hours or so if needed. Before we go, Dr. Feliz Noel Rodriguez will invite us for the next sessions. Dr. Noel?
Thank you very much to everyone for being with us and for being so patient, especially with the glitch. And we have actually been sharing this on different levels. So we have retained, for example, hundreds of those listeners and even patiently waiting for Professor Pierre-Yves Amanguan to come back to us. So tomorrow we continue on to the second day of the second part of the conference centering on boat building. Please join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for esteemed speakers, Dr. Maria Bernadette Abrera on pre-colonial Philippine boats and shipbuilding, and as well as Ms. Agni Mokhtar on the Lashlag Punjuharjo boat from Rembang, Indonesia. In the afternoon, at 2 p.m., we have Dr. Mary Jane Louise Bolunia, who shall speak on maritime exchange and trade, an avenue for linking people and sharing culture. Again, this conference runs from December 6 to 10, and do join us for more deep and meaningful discussions on the early Philippine and Southeast Asian boat building and gold crafting technology. On behalf of the Father Saturnino Urios University and the National Quincentennial Committee, we wish to thank everyone, especially those behind the scenes, the conference secretariat, and especially Philippine ambassador to France and Monaco, Juniver Bahilum West, for being disturbed. I had to call her up. She's in Paris right now. She's the ambassador, and to ask her for help to get in touch with Dr. Pierre-Yves Amanguan. Anyway, but most of all, we really want to thank Professor Dr. Pierre-Yves Amanguan for your graciousness in being here with us and sharing your knowledge and your time with us and repeating it again, your lecture. We're really sorry about that, and we really wish to thank you. Thank you as well to the moderator, Ms. Rochelle Valencia, who has expertly managed the lull time but has kept the conversation going and the questions coming. And of course, from all of you out there who have put in and have been remained interested and engaged, thank you very much, and see you tomorrow. This is Feliz Noel Rodriguez, co-convener of this conference, saying thank you for joining us this afternoon.
And if you want to check, Monsieur Manga, if you want to check the comment section of the Zoom session, you will see a lot of appreciation from the participants from all over the Philippines and from some parts of the world. Salamat kadiao to everyone for having stayed with us despite the glitch. This has been your moderator, Rochelle Valencia from Father Saturnino Urios University of Butuan City, Philippines. Bye and have a good day, everyone.